Shalom and welcome back to the Ministry of Yeshua. I'm glad that you're here to learn the Word of God with us. Today we're diving into this week's portion, which is called Beha'alotcha. We'll explore its wisdom, its beauty, and we'll see how it speaks to our lives right now. Together we'll look at passages from Numbers 8:1 through 12:16, which will connect us to Zechariah 2:14 through 4:7, as well as Matthew 14:14 through 21. Let's take a look at the Torah portion summary first. So the Torah portion begins with instructions to Aaron regarding the lighting of the menorah, followed by the consecration of the tribe of Levi. The Levites passed through a series of purification rituals and dedicatory ceremonies, and the first Passover celebration since leaving Egypt occurs at Mount Sinai. Some men are unable to make the Passover sacrifice because of the state of ritual unfitness incurred from contact with a dead body. The Lord allows a second opportunity to make the sacrifice 1 month later. On the 20th day of the second month of the first year, the cloud lifts and the priest sounded the silver trumpets. The cloud of glory is the visible token of the divine presence, and it leads the people through the wilderness. As Israel sets forth from Sinai, they move as the army of the Lord. The Ark of the Covenant goes ahead of them, as if to lead them into battle. Moses' father-in-law prepares to return to Midian. Moses urges him to stay with Israel and accompany them into the land. While on the way, the people begin to complain. The Lord hears their complaints, and he burns some of them with fire. A second round of complaints erupts when nostalgia for the food of Egypt sweeps over the camp, and the people express unhappiness with the manna. The Lord punishes them by sending an abundance of quail. Sickness and plague follow. After a few days of quail, they long for manna. Moses was so distressed with leadership that God appointed 70 elders, the first Sanhedrin, to share the responsibility. Miriam and Aaron complained that Moses is not the only prophet. They are prophets too, but Moses is an exceptional prophet who hears directly from God. Miriam is smitten with leprosy and put out of the camp for 7 days. Let's take a deeper look at Beha'alotcha. The third reading from the book of Numbers and the 36th reading from the Torah is called Beha'alotcha, a word that literally means when you set up. It comes from the first verse of the portion, which could literally be translated as when you set up the lamps, Numbers 8:2. A reference to the fact that the priest had to step up to clean and light the lamps of the menorah. This portion is pretty much jam-packed, telling the story of the consecration of Levites, the first Passover in the wilderness, the silver trumpets, the cloud of glory, the departure from Sinai, the grumbling in the wilderness, the first Sanhedrin, and the punishment of Miriam. And we'll start with something that's called centered and balanced. When you mount the lamps, the 7 lamps will give light in the front of the lampstand, Numbers 8:2. Sometimes life gets out of balance. A person might become obsessed with work and neglect his family. A pastor might get involved in a ministry that he neglects his wife. A person might find that he's spending so much time surfing the internet or watching professional sports that he neglects his responsibilities. Things can get out of balance in our religious lives too. A person can become so obsessed with studying the Torah that he forgets to do the Torah. Another person places all of his emphasis on the praise and worship and fails to engage in the study of the Word. Yet another person becomes so concerned with the ritual minutiae that he forgets the weighty matters of the Torah. In Messianic Judaism, people sometimes become so enamored with Judaism that they lose the sight of Messiah. Staying balanced is difficult. The menorah is a good illustration of living in balance. It had 3 lamps on the right and 3 lamps on the left, creating a perfect balance. Staying balanced requires keeping the things centered. Rashi explains that the wicks of the lamps on the left and the right of the menorah were tilted inward to point toward the center lamp. Messiah is the lamp at the center of our faith. To stay balanced and centered, we must bend all of our efforts and activities toward Him. When we go to our jobs, we should do our work for His honor. The income we acquire through our jobs is meant for the service of hastening His kingdom. When we raise our families, we should do so with the intention of raising up disciples for Him and contributing toward the work of proclaiming the good news. When we study or worship or apply the commandments, we should do so for the purpose of honoring Him and turning our hearts ever more toward Him. When Messiah is the center of our attention, the rest of our lives will fall naturally into balance. Consecration of the Levites. Thus you shall separate the Levites from among the sons of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine. Numbers 8:14. At the beginning of the book of Numbers, Moses and Aaron counted the Levites and set them aside for the service in the tabernacle. The Levites were substitutes for the firstborn sons of the Israelites. Before the Levites could serve in the tabernacle, they needed to be initiated into the tabernacle service in much the same way that Aaron and his sons had been initiated in the priesthood. And we remember that in Leviticus 8-9. Numbers 8 describes the inauguration of the Levites. And we can provide somewhat of an outline which summarizes the ritual procedure. So it starts with Moses' purification of the Levites. Levites must go through 7-day purification, sprinkled on the 3rd day with ashes of red heifer, and sprinkled on the 7th day with ashes of red heifer. On the 7th day, shave hair from body, wash garments, immersion, baptism ceremony, and Levites are ritually fit. And then there is a substitution ceremony. Levites presented at the tabernacle, congregation of Israel assembled, Israelites lay hands on Levites, and Aaron presents the Levites before the Lord as a wave offering. Then there is inaugural sacrifices. Levites bring sacrifices for inauguration, which is bull for burnt offering, bull for sin offering, grain offering. Then Levites lay hands on bulls, and the Levites offer sacrifices. Then Levites may enter the tabernacle to serve. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier. And the purification rituals made the Levites ritually fit to enter the tabernacle. So the Israelites laid hands on the Levites, indicating that the Levites were to serve as surrogates for their firstborn sons and to represent all Israel in the service of the sanctuary. This made the Levites like a type of sacrifice. In a sacrificial system, a man laid his hands upon the head of the animal he meant to sacrifice in order to invest it with his identity, that it may be accepted for him to make atonement on his behalf. And that's in Leviticus 1:4. In a similar way, the Levites were to make atonement on behalf of the sons of Israel, so that there will be no plague among the sons of Israel by their coming near to the sanctuary. And we see that in Numbers 8:19. The animal sacrifice goes to the altar of the Lord and in the stead of the man offering it. The same principle applied to the Levites. Because the Levites were to represent all Israel in their service in the tabernacle, all Israel needed to lay hands on them to invest them with that corporate identity. Unlike the animal sacrifices, the Levites were not supposed to be literally offered on the altar. Instead, Aaron presented them before the Lord as a wave offering, a type of sacrifice that is offered before God but is not burned on the altar. Things that are waved before the Lord are retained by the priests. And there is something that is called a Levitical contradiction. It says, they may, however, assist their brothers in a tent of meeting to keep an obligation, but they themselves shall do no work. Thus you shall deal with the Levites concerning their obligations. And that's Numbers 8:26. The Levites were to begin the term of their tabernacle service at the age of 25 and retire at the age of 50. And that's Numbers 8:24 says, from 25 years old and upward they shall enter to perform service in the work of the tent of meeting. This seems to contradict Numbers 4, where Moses is told 7 times to number the Levites from 30 years and upward, even to 50 years old. All who enter the service to do the work in the tent of meeting. So which one is it? Do the Levites begin their service at the age of 25 or at the age of 30? Rashi reconciles the contradiction by explaining that the Levites went through a 5-year apprenticeship, which began at the age of 25, but did not begin their official service until the age of 30. Levites faced mandatory retirement at the age of 50. The Torah does not mandate the retirement of the Levites because of obsolescence. That's our way of thinking. So in modern culture, we tend to see the age of 50 as the upper limit of person's usefulness. In the Torah culture, however, higher age brings greater respect. So why does the Torah mandate retirement at the age of 50? A 50-year-old Levite was surely as capable as a 30-year-old Levite. The Torah dismisses the Levite from his position of servitude when he turns 50 to accord him dignity appropriate to his age. To be a Levite is to be a servant of the priesthood. After serving 20 years in that capacity, the Torah allows the Levite to return to an independent status. Numbers 8:26 says that the retired Levites were allowed to assist their brothers in the tent of meeting, but they were not to perform the worship. So perhaps one way the retired Levites offered assistance was the training of the 25 to 30-year-old apprentices. The biblical pattern for teaching is that the older man should teach the younger man. In Titus 2, Paul urges the older men in the community to train the younger man in the ways of the kingdom. So imagine how different our communities might be if we valued the wisdom of gray heads over the charismatic exuberances of young men. And there is something that's called second chances. In the second month, on the 14th day at twilight, they shall observe it. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Numbers 9:11. When it came to the time to keep the first anniversary of Passover after leaving Egypt, the children of Israel prepared to bring lambs to the tabernacle for Passover sacrifices. However, when the festival came, there were several men who had become ritually unfit through contact with a dead body. Presumably, one of their kinsmen had died and they had to tend to the body. Jewish tradition suggests that these men might have been responsible for carrying of the bones of Joseph. According to the laws of the Torah, no one who is ritually unfit can eat of the sacrifices. Returning to a ritually fit state after contact with the dead body took 7 days. So the man would not be ritually fit in time to offer a Passover lamb or eat the meat of one. They complained to Moses, saying, "Though we are unclean because of the dead person, why are we restrained from presenting the offering of the Lord at its appointed time among the sons of Israel?" And that's in Numbers 9:7. Moses inquired about the matter. The Lord instructed him to institute a second Passover 1 month later, to be celebrated by anyone who was unable to participate in the first Passover because of being ritually unfit or too far away to reach the sanctuary. This special second Passover does not have any practical application today because there is no temple or Passover sacrifice. So a Jewish person can observe the festival of unleavened bread at the appointed time, whether or not he is ritually fit, in Jerusalem or abroad, but without a temple, no one can keep the Passover sacrifice. The second Passover is only instance in which God gave a second chance to someone who missed one of the appointed times. So the Torah does not give second chances for Pentecost, the Festival of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, or the Festival of Booths. What makes Passover different? Passover is different because it is the only festival at which everyone is expected to eat from a sacrifice. Therefore, it is the only festival where being ritually unfit would preclude the possibility of participation. In that way, Passover uniquely symbolizes the sacrificial death of Yeshua. Every person is required to partake of the sacrifice of Yeshua. We do so by believing in him, his death and resurrection, repenting from our sins, and confessing his name and trusting in him for forgiveness. As with the Passover, God gives second chances for this sacrifice. A person might hear the message about the Messiah but refuses to receive it. Nevertheless, so long as the person lives, God is willing to accept the person's change of the heart. The door to confess sin and to receive the grace of God through the sacrifice of Yeshua is always open to everyone who knocks. The blast of the trumpets. Make yourself 2 trumpets of silver, of hammered work you shall make them, and you shall use them for summoning the congregation, for having the camp set out. Numbers 10:2. The Israelites made 2 trumpets to use for calling assemblies, breaking camp, and setting out the camps. These trumpets were not shofar, ram's horn trumpets. They were silver trumpets. Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian, describes them as following. Moreover, Moses was the inventor of the form of their trumpet, which was made of silver. Its description is this. In length it was little less than a cubit. It was composed of narrow tube, somewhat thicker than a flute, but with so much breath as was sufficient for admission of the breath of man's mouth. It ended in the form of a bell, like a common trumpet's. Its sound was called in the Hebrew tongue asosra. And that's in Josephus, Antiquities 3/291. How did Josephus know what they looked like? He did not. However, he was a descendant of Aaron and had served in the priesthood in Jerusalem temple before its destruction. His description of Moses' silver trumpets is probably a description of the trumpets he had seen employed in the temple. Trumpets similar to the ones he described can be seen carved on the famous Ark of Titus in Rome, actually, built to commemorate Titus' victory in Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. The Torah says that certain types of blasts were to be used to signal specific instructions to Israelites. A long blast with both trumpets signaled the entire assembly to meet at the tabernacle. A blast on a single trumpet summoned only the leaders to meet. And when the trumpets were sounded with short blasts, it was time to break the camp and set out. A series of short blasts on both trumpets was to be sounded during the times of a war. And the trumpets were also to be blown to announce Sabbath, festival days, new moons, and the times of sacrifice. It says, also in the day of your gladness and in your appointed feasts and on the first days of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offering and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings. And they shall be as a reminder of you before your God. I am the Lord your God. Numbers 10:10. Numbers 10 uses different Hebrew words for the different kinds of trumpet blasts. Jewish tradition tells us that these trumpet blasts followed specific patterns. So the trumpet blasts are still used in Judaism today for blowing of the shofar, especially on the Festival of Trumpets, which is Rosh Hashanah. When describing the trumpeting, the Torah uses a form of the Hebrew word tekiah. When both are blown, tekiah, all the congregation shall gather themselves to you at the doorway of the tent of meeting. And that's in Numbers 10:3. A tekiah is a long, steady blast. Numbers 10:5 mentions blowing an alarm. The word translated as alarm is the Hebrew word of teruah. The Hebrew word teruah is sometimes translated as shout. This may shed light on the passage where Paul says, the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel and with the trumpet of God. And that's in 1 Thessalonians 4:16. According to tradition, a teruah is a series of 9 short staccato blasts. And one additional type of blast exists in Jewish tradition. It is called shevarim. It consists of a series of 3 short, slurred soundings. On Rosh Hashanah, one man in a synagogue is given the opportunity, or I guess the responsibility, of sounding the shofar. He uses a combination of these blasts as they appear in the liturgies of Rosh Hashanah. The main pattern for the sounding of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is tekiah, shevarim, teruah, tekiah. The last blast at tekiah gedola means a big blast. Now you know what to do with that shofar you bought on your last trip to Israel, but practice hard. because these sounds are repeated in different combinations on Rosh Hashanah at least 30 times for a grand total of 100 blasts. The last trumpets. The priestly sons of Aaron moreover shall blow the trumpets, and this shall be for you a perpetual statute throughout your generations. Numbers 10:8. The blowing of the silver trumpets in the temple is an earthly echo of the great trumpets of the Lord that will be sounded in heaven at the commencement of the days of awe described in the book of the Revelation. In that book, John describes 7 trumpets blasts that correspond to various judgments visited on the earth. The blowing of the silver trumpet is supposed to be a permanent statute, practiced by the Aaronic priesthood throughout all generations. Why aren't the silver trumpets used in Judaism today? Why don't the sons of Aaron blow silver trumpets in synagogues on Sabbath and holidays? The silver trumpets were not meant to be used just anywhere. They were among the holy vessels of the tabernacle. Their use was specifically connected to the worship services in the tabernacle. It would be inappropriate to use the trumpets outside of the Levitical context. When the temple was destroyed, the silver trumpets went silent. When the Messiah comes, the clear sound of the silver trumpets will again be heard echoing off the hills of Jerusalem. Rise up, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. Numbers 10:35. As the camp of Israel set out, they moved in formation as the army of the Lord. The Ark of the Covenant led them into battle. When the Levites stepped forth carrying the ark on poles, Moses would say, Rise up, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you. And that's in Numbers 10:35. When the Israelites were ready to make camp and return to the Ark of the Tabernacle, Moses would say, Return, O Lord, to the myriad thousands of Israel. Numbers 10:36. In the Torah scroll, Numbers 10:35 through 36 is set off from the rest of the text of the book by a special mark before and after the verses. The mark is in the shape of the letter Nun, turned upside down. The inverted nuns are scribal marks. The ancient scribes used the inverted nuns to set those 2 verses aside from the rest of the passage. Unfortunately, no one remembers why. Some of the sages of Judaism speculated that the marks were meant to show that those 2 verses are outside of the narrative's chronological order. Another opinion has it that those 2 verses are meant to be understood as separate book of the Torah. The 2 verses are used in the synagogue as part of the liturgy for the Torah service. As the Torah scroll is removed from the ark, at the front of the synagogue, the congregation prays, Rise up, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you. Numbers 10:35. After the Torah reading is completed, the scroll is rolled up and placed back in the ark. As the scroll is put back inside its ark, the congregation prays, Return, O Lord, to the myriad thousands of Israel. Numbers 10:36. These petitions were actually a war cry of sorts. The Ark of the Covenant traveling in front of the ranks of Israel symbolized God himself leading the charge into battle and scattering his enemies. But does God, who created all things, actually have enemies? The rabbis explained that the enemies of Israel are the enemies of God. Those who hate and persecute his people are his enemies. Satan, the greatest enemy of all, is called Satan because he is the accuser of the brethren. The Hebrew word for accuser is Satan. As the word of God goes forth, the armies of the darkness are scattered. Our greatest weapon against the devil is the Bible. Malcontents. Now the people became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of the Lord. Numbers 11:1. God is slow to anger, usually. Complaining can incite his swift wrath. While on their way to Promised Land, the children of Israel began to complain. God heard this and smote them with fire. On another occasion, they complained about the manna. Not that anything was wrong with the manna, they were just tired of eating the same thing every day. God punished these malcontents by giving them something else to eat. He sent them quail, and the quail made them sick. The book of Numbers contains several stories of the Israel's discontent in the wilderness. In each story, the Israelites complain about something and God punishes them for complaining. The lesson is simple. God doesn't like complaining. For this reason, Paul urges us not to grumble as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, and that's in 1 Corinthians 10:10 through 11. The generation in the wilderness were not worse complainers than any other collection of human beings. Every congregation of believers that we have ever been a part of has been vexed by the ceaseless grumbling of the members. Human beings are prone to complain. It often seems that people are not happy unless they find something to be unhappy about. Nothing seems to please us more than complaining about what we don't like and what things do not meet our approval. We are malcontents. A person of faith is duty-bound to rise above the natural human instinct to complain and criticize. And as our friend says, as a child, whenever he would complain about having a bad day, his father would reply, "This is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." And that's from Psalm 118:24. So every day our lives is full of both good things and bad things. Every human being has positive characteristics and negative characteristics. If we concentrate on the bad things that each day contains and the negative characteristics that each person possesses, we will spend our entire lives in an ugly world where everything goes wrong all the time and everyone we know is grossly deficient. With our critical spirits and tongues, we can actually ruin our own lives. Paul encourages us to do all things without grumbling or disputing, and that's in Philippians 2:14. Complaining is a form of evil speech also, lashon hara. It has evil results in our lives and in the lives of others. Nobody wants to be around a chronic complainer. A critical person complains against God. The Didache warns that grumbling and complaining is a symptom of haughty spirit and that it can lead to blasphemy. It says, "My child, do not be a complainer, because this leads to blasphemy, nor be egocentric, nor malevolent. For from all these things blasphemy results. Rather be humble, because the humble will inherit the earth. Be patient, merciful, gentle, quiet, and good-natured, always trembling at the words that you have heard." And that's in Didache 3:6-8. Grumbling about things is a telltale sign of weak faith. A person of strong faith has confidence that God is in charge and is working all things out for the good. He is not given to complaining because he believes that everything is ultimately in God's hands. The antidote for poisoned, malcontented spirit is gratitude. When we force ourselves to focus on the good and the positive, and to thank God for all the blessings He daily bestows, the way we experience life is transformed. But we should not thank God only for the good things. We should thank Him for everything. As Paul says, "In everything give thanks, for this is God's will for you in the Messiah Yeshua." 1 Thessalonians 5:18. Judaism actually teaches that there is even a blessing for when one hears bad news. And we say, "Blessed is the true judge." Moses under pressure. So Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you been so hard on your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight that you have laid the burden of all these people on me?" Numbers 11:11. And our friend has a story for us which he says that he once sought counsel from the senior pastor of the church he was attending at the time. And he told him, "I am feeling called to serve God in the ministry as a teacher, and I'm thinking about becoming a pastor." He looked at him with a weary but sympathetic expression and said, "Don't do it unless there is nothing else in the world that you can imagine yourself doing. He went on to explain that being a congregational leader or teacher is one of the most difficult jobs a person could ever undertake. Why? Because of the burden of the people. Moses cried out, "Why have I not found favor in your sight that you have laid the burden of all these people on me?" Numbers 11:11. Moses was exhausted with the ceaseless grumbling and complaining of the people. He said, "I alone am not able to carry all these people because it's too burdensome for me." Numbers 11:14. He begged God to put him out of his misery by taking his life. If you are a parent, you know how maddening it can be when your children are whining and complaining about all manner of trivial matters. A spiritual leader is in a similar position but with many more children. So the next time you're tempted to complain about your pastor, leader, rabbi, or teacher, or the next time you find yourself complaining about your church, congregation, or faith community, remember the story of Moses. The cumulative burden of the people's complaints was enough to put Moses over the edge. How much more so your spiritual leader? Moses was the greatest leader of the nation of Israel has ever known, but dealing with people made him suicidal in a way. If Moses could not withstand the pressure of leading God's people, how much less can an average person withstand those pressures? The irony of this passage is that Moses himself became a complainer. He was complaining about people always complaining. In so doing, he became the very thing he criticized. One time, our friend was grumbling to his wife about a certain person, and he felt that person was too critical and always pointed out other people's faults. As he told his wife about it, it suddenly occurred to him that he was doing the same thing. By complaining about the complainer, he was guilty of the same sin. God rescued Moses by giving him other leaders to help carry the burden of the people and to remind Moses of his sufficiency. Those who undertake to serve the kingdom of heaven through leading God's people need to remember both of these things. Our congregational leaders can find relief by sharing the burden of responsibility with a plurality of leaders, and they need to remember to rely on God's strengths rather than their own. And there's a quote that says, "We were living from hand to mouth. I carried on ministries that didn't pay and worked long hours to make a living and to study and prepare for ministries. I was in one of those deep depressions, almost despairing of life, almost suicidal. We came home from Sunday school, and Sherry, just as cute as little curly-haired blonde could be, said, 'Daddy, I learned a verse in Sunday school. Do you want to hear me say it?' 'Yes, I do, Sherry,' he replied. 'Sweet as could be,' she said, 'Thou, God, carest for me.' It was like the times the Bible verses jumps right out of the page at you. It hit him so hard, so wonderfully, that his spirit soared. Of course God cares for me. Why am I so depressed and afraid? God cares for me." And that was a quote that a father wrote to our friend about his struggle with depression while pastoring his first church. And we'll talk about the first Sanhedrin. "The Lord therefore said to Moses, 'Gather for me 70 men from the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and their officers, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand there with you.'" Numbers 11:16. Moses complained that he was no longer able to single-handedly lead Israel. God capitulated and allowed Moses to appoint 70 elders as co-leaders. The Lord said to Moses, "I will take of the Spirit who is upon you, and will put him upon them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you will not bear it all alone." Numbers 11:17. The 70 elders acting in the spirit and authority of Moses constitute the first Sanhedrin. The New Testament readers are familiar with the institution of the Sanhedrin from the Gospels and Acts. In those stories, the Sanhedrin plays the role of prosecutor and persecutor of the believers. However, we should realize that the Sanhedrin was actually a biblically ordained institution. The Sanhedrin was like the Supreme Court over Israel. And what is the shortened arm? The Lord said to Moses, "Is the Lord's power limited? Now you shall see whether my word will come true for you or not." Numbers 11:23. So Moses felt depressed, we can say. Depression is the enemy of faith. Depression and self-pity create a spiritual blindness. When Moses allowed himself to be overcome by the pressures and stresses of his responsibilities, he slipped into despondency and temporarily went spiritually blind. He seems to have momentarily forgotten who God is and what God had done in the past. The Lord told Moses that he would provide Israel with a month's supply of meat. Moses protested against the plan, pointing out to God that it would be impossible to procure sufficient meat to feed 600,000 men for a month. Moses rhetorically asked, should flocks and herds be slaughtered for them? Would it be sufficient for them? Or should all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them? Would it be sufficient for them? Numbers 11:22. Moses' reply seemed shocking in a way. Had Moses forgotten that God was already miraculously feeding the people on a daily basis? If God chose to feed them meat instead of manna every morning, what difference did that make? Moses' despondency had blinded him to God's power. His depression had flattened his faith. God responded with a rhetorical question of his own. He asked Moses, "Is the Lord's power limited?" Numbers 11:23. A literal translation of the Hebrew is more poetic. He asked Moses, "Has the hand of the Lord become shorter?" In other words, are you suggesting that the God who wrought the 10 plagues, split the sea, fed you with manna, and brought water from the rock has lost his power? The next time you find yourself doubting God, ask yourself, has the hand of the Lord become shorter? The next time you find yourself despondent and depressed, remind yourself of the great things God has done in the past. Then I said, "It is my grief that the right hand of the Most High has changed. I shall remember the deeds of the Lord. Surely I will remember your wonders of old. I will meditate on all your works and muse on your deeds." Psalm 77:10-12. The Lord showed himself to be sufficient by sending quail to the camp of Israel. And the Israelites ate quail until it made them sick, and they started longing for manna again. The gift of prophecy. Then the Lord came down in a cloud and spoke to him, and he took of the Spirit who was upon him and placed him upon the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, but they did not do it again. Numbers 11:25. God installed the 70 elders over Israel by taking of the Spirit that was on Moses and distributing the same spiritual gifting among the leaders. When the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied. Numbers 11:25. Moses was a prophet, and now all 70 elders of the first Sanhedrin were also prophets, at least momentarily. What is a prophecy? It is common to think of a prophecy as the art of predicting the future. A prophet is someone who can see what will happen in the future. That's not what the Bible means when it speaks about prophecy. The biblical prophets were not fortune tellers. In the Bible, prophecy is a communication directly from God. A prophet is someone who hears from God. The message may or may not have something to do with the future. It depends on what God is talking about. So prophets in the Bible usually receive their communication from God in the form of dreams, visions, or oracles. The prophetic oracles often came to the prophets in the form of poetry and song. That's why most of the books of the prophets are like long, extended collections of ancient poetry. Some prophets needed to have music playing before they could prophesy. Prophets rose up all through Israel's history. They were rare individuals with a special gifting. The 70 elders in the tabernacle received a portion of the Spirit that was on Moses and prophesied, but they did not do it again. Numbers 11:25. However, Eldad and Medad had not come to the tabernacle. They had been chosen to be among the 70 elders, but for some reason they had not come to the tabernacle when summoned. As the elders in the tabernacle began to prophesy, Eldad and Medad prophesied in the camp. When Moses heard about it, he said, "Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his spirit upon them all. Numbers 11:29. In keeping with Moses' wish, the prophet Joel predicted that when Messiah comes, the spirit of prophecy will be poured out on everyone. Joel's prediction has already been partially fulfilled in that God has poured out his Holy Spirit on the followers of Yeshua. In the days of the apostles, many prophets arose among the believers. Each of the apostles received a measure of prophecy. As followers of Yeshua, we all share a portion of the Spirit that was on Yeshua. We are able to receive communication from God in a form of prophecy. Perhaps you have occasionally received a message from God through a dream, vision, or an oracle. Occasional prophetic endowment is a normal for followers of Yeshua, but it does not necessarily make us prophets. A prophet is someone who is specifically anointed by God for the purpose of conveying prophecies to his people. Miriam's punishment. So Miriam was shut up outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move until Miriam was received again. And that's Numbers 12:15. Even Aaron and Miriam were not above the sin of grumbling. Numbers 12:1-2 relates a few details about their complaints against Moses. Apparently, they had something against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married. The Torah does not tell us the details of their gripe, but people are often irritated by their sibling spouses. The complaint against Moses had to do with his role as leader over the assembly. Both Miriam and Aaron were prophets in their own right. They had each personally received prophecies from God. They began to resent Moses' sole leadership over the assembly. Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? Numbers 12:2. They asked. Miriam and Aaron assumed that no one could hear their private gripe session against their brother. They forgot that God could hear. The Torah says, and the Lord heard it. And that's in Numbers 12:2. How many times do we indulge in a private conversations, forgetting that God is listening? We should always remember that our words are not only heard, but actually recorded in heaven. But I tell you that every careless word the people speak, they shall give an accounting for it in the day of judgment. For by your words you'll be justified, and by your words you'll be condemned. Matthew 12:36-37. The scene in Numbers 12 reminds us of many similar situations in our homes. We have a friend that shared his story. He had 3 sons share a bedroom upstairs. When they were younger, they would sometimes quarrel in hushed voices, hoping that he would not hear them. On their occasions, his wife and him would hear a sudden howl of pain come from the upstairs room as one brother vented his wrath on another. At other times, a sudden ruckus would erupt. When these things happened, he would put on his stern father voice and call out, "You 3, come down here right now." They would dutifully file down the stairs with glum expressions, prepared for the inevitable cross-examination and consequences. Similarly, in Numbers 12:4, we read, "Suddenly the Lord said to Moses and Aaron and to Miriam, 'You 3, come out to the tent of meeting.' So the 3 of them came out. The Lord struck Miriam with leprosy as a punishment for speaking evil against her brother. Moses interceded on her behalf with a short, urgent prayer, and the Lord relented and removed the leprosy, but Miriam still had to be put outside the camp for 7 days until she was ritually fit again. The most puzzling thing about the story is why Miriam was smitten with leprosy while Aaron was not. Perhaps Aaron was spared because of his responsibility in the priesthood, or perhaps because Miriam instigated the gossip, which she actually did. Those are possible explanations, but one ancient tradition taught that Aaron was also struck with leprosy. According to that tradition, the Torah did not mention Aaron's punishment out of respect for the office of the high priest. We know this was an opinion early in Judaism because one ancient rabbi warns anyone who says that Aaron was also smitten with the leprosy will have to give an account in heaven. When God has concealed the matter concerning Aaron, how dare we reveal it? Clement, a disciple of Peter, preserved the same tradition. He taught that Aaron was also put out of the camp for 7 days. Clement said, on the account of envy, Aaron and Miriam had to make their abode outside the camp. 1 Clement 4:11. But there's actually an interesting midrash about the story. And the story basically happened that it had something to do with sexual relations. Supposedly Moses had to abstain from sexual relations with his wife because he was sort of above on the level of holiness from anybody else. And when Miriam, his sister, heard it, well, she heard it by talking to his wife, because it must have been difficult for his wife, and she went and told Aaron, like, did you hear that Moses stays away from sexual acts with his wife because he's, so holy in a way? And then she somewhat compared herself to him and Aaron. She said, are we not, prophets as well? Are we not on the same level? But we can, we don't have to stay away from sexual contact, so how come he did? And basically by, comparing herself to him, saying that they're all on the same level, and spreading one of the most important points, that she spread out a very personal matter to Aaron, and who knows, maybe other people overheard. That's why she was struck with leprosy. And I'm assuming since Aaron was, participant, that she told him, he might have been put out as well, but we for sure do not know that. And we'll talk about the greatest prophet. With him I speak mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant, against Moses? Numbers 12:8. In his 13 Principles of Faith, Maimonides, Rambam, refers to Moses as the father of prophets, both of those who preceded him and of those who followed him, with the exception of the Messiah. Moses is the greatest prophet who ever lived. Moses, Aaron, and Miriam all had the gift of prophecy, but Miriam and Aaron were not in the same league with Moses. They were ordinary prophets. Moses was a prophet extraordinary. God spoke to Miriam and Aaron the way he spoke to other prophets in visions, dreams, riddles, and poetic oracles. The Lord explained, with Moses I speak mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Numbers 12:8. So he heard the voice of God directly. No oracles or visions. He simply heard the voice of God speaking to him mouth to mouth. That is conversationally. This is what makes the Torah so special. It is a written record of direct communication spoken directly from God through his greatest prophet, Moses. It's not a book of riddles and mysteries. It is, for the most part, an actual transcript of God's words. The Lord asked Aaron and Miriam, why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant, against Moses? Numbers 12:8. He who speaks against Moses speaks against God. To speak against the Torah is to speak against God. This can be compared to a king who had a steward against whom the people spoke. The king said to them, when you spoke against my steward, you did not speak against him, you spoke against me. The steward represents the king. Disrespect for the steward was disrespect for the king. Similarly, Yeshua told his disciples, believe in God, believe also in me. And that's in John 14:1. What made Moses worthy of being the greatest prophet in the world? The Torah tells us a few verses earlier that Moses was the humblest man in the world. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who was on the face of the earth. And that's in Numbers 12:3. The humility of Moses made room for God to use him. Because he was the humblest man on the face of the earth, he qualified to be the greatest prophet on the face of the earth. This is an important lesson. God is not looking for great men. He is looking for the humble, the meek, and the poor in spirit. And that's about it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If this message blessed you, please like the video and subscribe. It helps a lot for the message to reach more people who need encouragement and truth. And feel free to follow our Instagram, linked in the comments, for daily inspiration as well as daily prayers. May God bless you and keep you. May He shine His light on you and be gracious to you. May He turn towards you and grant you peace. Grace and shalom to you all.